The fluorescent light above the bulletproof glass flickers like a dying heartbeat. Rain pounds the cracked sidewalk outside, each drop echoing the rhythm of desperation that brought her here. Behind that glass, a woman with acrylic nails, the color of fresh blood, slides a single sheet of paper across the metal tray. "Amount needed?" she asks, her voice flat as week-old soda. 600, comes the whispered reply. The pen trembles as it moves across the signature line. One name, one moment, one decision that would transform a $600 emergency into a $3,600 lesson in financial survival. The neon sign outside buzzes and flickers. Cash now, no credit check, fast approval. But nobody mentions the real tagline. Welcome to the trap that never lets go. Have you ever been so desperate for money that 600% annual interest sounded reasonable? Her name is Maria Santos, and at 43, she carries the weight of 2 worlds on her shoulders. Every morning at 4:47 a.m., her alarm clock, a cheap digital thing with numbers that glow green in the darkness, pulls her from dreams of financial security into the reality of making ends meet with string and prayer. The apartment smells like yesterday's coffee, and the lavender Febreze she sprays religiously to mask the dampness that seeps through the walls every time it rains. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen where the linoleum curls at the edges like old photographs. But it's theirs, hers, and her 2 teenagers, Diego and Sofia. And that makes it worth the $650 monthly rent that devours nearly half her income. Maria works the morning shift at Valley View Diner, where the coffee is strong enough to wake the dead, and the regulars know her by name, 5 a.m. to 2 p.m., Tuesday through Saturday. Her uniform, identical sets of black pants and white button-down shirts that she washes every other night in the bathtub to save quarters at the laundromat, carries the permanent aroma of bacon grease and hope. She walks to work when the weather permits, 17 minutes each way through neighborhoods that have seen better decades. When it rains, like today, she takes the bus, counting out exact change from a Crown Royal bag that once belonged to her father, now repurposed to hold the quarters and dimes that represent the difference between making it and not making it each week. Maria's financial education came from the University of Necessity. She knows that Murphy's brand-name detergent costs $4.97, but the store brand costs $2.49 and cleans just as well. She knows that Wednesday is senior discount day at Albertsons, even though she's not a senior, because she's learned to shop the patterns of other people's discounts. She knows exactly which gas stations have the cleanest restrooms, because when you're working a shift job with teenagers who need rides, public restrooms become part of your daily geography. Her weekly ritual has the precision of a Swiss watch. Friday paycheck deposited by direct deposit at exactly 3:17 p.m. Rent money transferred to a separate account by 4 p.m. before she can spend it on something that seems more urgent. Groceries bought between 6 and 7 p.m. when the deli items go to half price. Utilities scheduled for autopay on Sunday nights because late fees are a luxury she can't afford. Every dollar in Maria's world has a name before it arrives. Rent dollars, food dollars, gas dollars, school supply dollars. Emergency dollars, though those are more theoretical than actual, like unicorns or paid vacation days. She'd tried budgeting systems she'd read about online during her 15-minute breaks at work. The 50 divided by 30 divided by 20 rule sounded beautiful. 50% for needs, 30% for wants, 20% for savings. But in Maria's reality, 85% went to needs, 15% went to whatever crisis demanded immediate attention, and savings remained a concept for people who had solved the puzzle of making $1,400 stretch across $1,600 worth of monthly necessities. The three envelopes method had made sense when her co-worker Carmen explained it. One envelope for fixed bills, one for variable expenses like food and gas, one for emergencies. But emergencies kept emptying all three envelopes, leaving Maria to perform financial shell games where she was always both the player and the mark. Maria had managed to avoid debt for years through sheer willpower and creative mathematics. No credit cards, because she'd watched too many co-workers get trapped in minimum payment cycles that seemed designed to never actually pay anything off. No car loans, because she bought used Hondas with whatever cash she could scrape together and drove them until the repair costs exceeded their value. No store financing, because she understood that 90 days, same as cash, usually meant 91 days of interest that makes the original price look like a practical joke. But understanding debt and needing money are two different mathematics problems, and Maria was about to learn that lesson in the most expensive way possible. The money lesson started early in the Santos family. Maria's grandmother, Esperanza, had survived the Great Depression by treating every penny like it might be her last. She kept cash in coffee cans throughout her small house, each one labeled with masking tape in her careful cursive: rent money, do not touch; food money, count twice; church money, God sees everything; emergency money, only God decides what emergency means. Mija, Esperanza would whisper to young Maria as she counted and recounted the worn bills. Debt is like a snake that grows longer every time you feed it. The only way to win is never to let it into your house. But Esperanza had lived in a different world, where a factory job could support a family, where medical emergencies were handled with home remedies and prayer, where the safety net of extended family could catch you when you fell. Maria lived in a world where everything cost more and wages stayed the same, where health insurance was a luxury item, where family members were just as likely to need help as to give it. Still, she'd tried to follow Esperanza's wisdom. For years, Maria had managed to dance just ahead of financial disaster through careful planning and constant vigilance. She knew which bills could be paid 3 days late without penalty, which grocery stores doubled coupons on Wednesdays, which friends could be trusted with babysitting trades when money was too tight for actual childcare. She'd even managed to save money, not much, but enough to feel like maybe she was finally getting ahead. $247 in a savings account at the credit union, accumulated over 18 months of depositing her occasional tips and the spare change from careful grocery budgeting. It wasn't much, but it was hers, clean and honest and untouchable except for real emergencies. Maria had heard about debt management strategies from customers at the diner. Lawyers and nurses and insurance salesmen would discuss debt snowball versus debt avalanche methods over their morning coffee, debating whether it was better to pay off smallest debts first for the psychological wins, or tackle the highest interest rates first to save money in the long run. Both methods assumed you had extra money to throw at debt, which seemed like the kind of luxury problem faced by people who had never counted quarters to buy milk or chosen between filling the gas tank and buying groceries. But Maria filed the information away anyway, the same way she filed away all the financial wisdom that might someday become relevant if her circumstances ever improved. The debt snowball method made emotional sense. Pay minimum amounts on everything except the smallest debt. Attack that one with everything you've got. Then roll that payment into the next smallest debt when the first one was gone. Like building momentum, one small victory leading to bigger ones. The debt avalanche method made mathematical sense. Pay minimums on everything except the debt with the highest interest rate. Attack that one to save the most money long-term, regardless of balance size. More efficient, but requiring the kind of patience that's hard to maintain when you're living paycheck to paycheck. Both methods assumed you had a plan, a budget, a clear picture of where your money was going, and where it needed to go instead. Maria had tried to create those budgets, sitting at her kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a calculator that had lost its solar panel cover, trying to make numbers behave that had no interest in cooperation. But life had a way of making budgets irrelevant. Just when she'd think she had a handle on her finances, Diego would need new shoes because his feet had grown, or Sophia would need money for a field trip, or the car would make that noise that meant expensive things were about to break. Still, Maria had managed to avoid credit card debt, managed to avoid payday loans, managed to keep her head above water through careful planning and the kind of constant vigilance that exhausts you even when nothing goes wrong. She'd seen the payday loan stores, of course. They were everywhere in her neighborhood, bright and shiny as casinos, with names like Fast Cash and Quick Money and Your Payday Pal. She'd walked past them hundreds of times, usually with her head down and her pace quick, the way you walk past something you don't want to think about too carefully. Maria had noticed that the people going in and out of those stores looked a lot like her, tired, worried, carrying the weight of problems that money could solve if only they had enough of it. But she'd also noticed that the same people seemed to go back again and again, week after week, like it was part of their regular routine. That should have been a warning sign, but when disaster strikes, warning signs become invisible. The foundation of Maria's money story was built on the simple principle that you never borrow money you can't afford to pay back. It was a good principle, a sound principle, a principle that had kept her out of trouble for 43 years. But principles are easy to maintain when you're not watching your son double over in pain in the middle of the night, clutching his stomach and unable to stand up straight. Tuesday, the 17th of October, 2:34 a.m. The sound that woke Maria wasn't her alarm clock or the neighbor's dog or the garbage truck that always came too early. It was the sound of her 7-year-old son Diego retching in the bathroom, followed by a moan that cut through the thin apartment walls like a knife through tissue paper. She found him on the bathroom floor, knees pulled to his chest, face the color of old newspaper. When she touched his forehead, his skin burned with fever that seemed to be coming from somewhere deep inside his body. "Mom," he whispered, "something's really wrong." The drive to the emergency room took 12 minutes, that felt like 12 hours. Diego's face kept changing colors in the dashboard lights, and every bump in the road made him gasp with pain that sounded like it was being torn from his chest. The emergency room at City General smelled like disinfectant and desperation. The fluorescent lights were too bright, the chairs were too hard, and the television in the corner was playing infomercials at volumes that suggested everyone in the waiting room was deaf. Maria sat with Diego's head in her lap, stroking his hair and whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. "We're going to be okay, baby. We're going to figure this out." At 4:17 a.m., a doctor who looked younger than Sophia explained that Diego had appendicitis. The appendix had to come out, and it had to come out now, before it ruptured and turned a serious situation into a life-threatening one. "Do you have insurance?" the admissions clerk asked, fingers poised over a keyboard that had seen better decades. "No," Maria said, the word feeling like broken glass in her throat. "We'll need to discuss payment arrangements, but first, let's get your son into surgery." The surgery took 2 hours. Maria spent those hours in a waiting room that smelled like burnt coffee and fear, watching the sun rise through windows that needed cleaning, trying not to think about money and failing completely. When the doctor emerged with good news, surgery successful, Diego would be fine, no complications. Maria felt relief wash over her like warm water. Then the financial counselor appeared with a folder full of papers and numbers that turned the warm water ice cold. Total cost, $8,400. Surgeon's fee, anesthesiologist, hospital charges, medications, post-operative care, $8,400. Maria's savings account balance, $247. The financial counselor, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and the practiced sympathy of someone who delivered this kind of news several times a day, spread the papers across the table like she was dealing cards in a game Maria didn't know how to play. "We have several payment options," she explained in the tone people use when they're trying to deliver bad news gently. "We can set up a payment plan with no interest if you can make monthly payments of at least $350. We also have a charity care program for qualifying families, but the application process takes 30 to 60 days, and we'd still need arrangements for immediate payment." Maria did the math in her head, the same math she did every month when trying to make $1,400 cover $1,600 worth of necessities. Take-home pay, $1,400. Rent, $650. Utilities, $180. Food, $400. Transportation, $120. That left $50 per month for everything else. Number die. School supplies, clothes, emergency repairs, the occasional movie rental that made their small apartment feel less like a prison. $350 per month for the hospital bill meant cutting $300 from somewhere else. But where? Food. They were already eating rice and beans more often than meat. Utilities? Not optional. Rent? Eviction wasn't negotiable. "I can afford $75 per month," Maria said, knowing it wasn't enough, but hoping it might be a starting point for negotiation. "Our minimum payment plan is $175 per month," the counselor replied. "Anything less than that, and we'd have to pursue other collection methods." Other collection methods. Maria had heard those words before, whispered in conversations between co-workers who'd fallen behind on medical bills or credit card payments. Wage garnishment, damaged credit. Collection calls at all hours. Legal action that could take what little she had and leave her with even less. "I need some time to figure this out," Maria said. "Of course, you have 30 days before the account goes to collections." 30 days, 4 paychecks. $1,400 times 4 equals $5,600 gross income, minus rent and utilities, and food and transportation, equals not nearly enough to pay $8,400 in cash. Maria signed the papers acknowledging the debt and walked out of the hospital with Diego, who was groggy but alive and complaining about being hungry, which she took as a good sign. They took the bus home because she was afraid to drive after being awake for 20 hours straight, and she used the bus ride to do the mathematics of survival. Option 1. Payment plan at $175 per month. But where would that $175 come from? She could eat less, but Diego and Sofia were still growing. She could skip meals at work, but she needed energy to do her job. She could ask for more shifts, but the diner was already struggling and couldn't afford more full-time employees. Option 2. Apply for charity care and hope for approval. But charity care wasn't guaranteed, and even if approved, it might only reduce the bill, not eliminate it. And she still needed money right now to keep them from pursuing collection. Option 3. Find $8,400 somewhere. But where? She had no family members with that kind of money. Her credit was non-existent because she'd never borrowed money. Banks didn't make loans to people without credit history or collateral. Option 4. The Payday loan store on 5th Street with the neon sign that promised cash now, no credit check. For the first time in her adult life, Option 4 started to look reasonable. Friday morning, 3 days after Diego's surgery. Maria had spent 72 hours running numbers that refused to cooperate, looking for solutions that didn't exist, and watching her son recover while trying not to let him see her panic. She'd called the hospital twice to ask about charity care applications, but the process was Byzantine and slow: income verification, asset documentation, committee review, decision in 30 to 45 days. Even if approved, charity care might only reduce the bill by 50%, leaving her with $4,200 she still couldn't afford. She'd stopped by the credit union during her lunch break to ask about a personal loan, but without credit history or collateral, they couldn't help. "Have you considered a secured credit card?" The loan officer suggested helpfully. "Build up your credit over the next year, then come back, and we'll see what we can do." A year. Diego's surgery bill couldn't wait a year. She'd even swallowed her pride and called her sister Rosa in Phoenix, who had a good job and a husband with an even better job. But Rosa's voice had gotten tight and careful when Maria explained the situation. "Maria, I wish I could help, but we just put a down payment on a new house, and money's really tight right now. Maybe 100 or two, but not thousands. 100 or two wouldn't even cover the interest on $8,400 for a month." Friday evening, walking home from work, Maria found herself standing in front of the Payday loan store on 5th Street. The neon sign buzzed and flickered. "Cash now, no credit check, fast approval." Through the window, she could see a clean, brightly lit office with motivational posters on the walls and a customer service counter that looked more like a bank than a trap. The woman behind the bulletproof glass looked normal, middle-aged, professionally dressed, the kind of person you might see at the grocery store or the parent-teacher conference. Not the predatory monster Maria had imagined based on warnings she'd heard about payday lenders. "Can I help you?" the woman asked through the speaker system, her voice friendly and helpful. "I'm just looking at options," Maria said. "My son had emergency surgery, and I need to make a payment on the hospital bill." "Oh, honey, that's exactly why we're here. Medical emergencies happen to everyone, and sometimes you need cash fast to handle them. How much do you need?" Maria had done the math during her bus ride home. The hospital wanted $175 minimum payment by the end of the month. She had $50 available after all her regular expenses. She needed $600 to make the first payment and have a little cushion for unexpected expenses. $600, she said, the words feeling strange in her mouth. "That's no problem at all. It's a $90 fee for 2 weeks, so you'd pay back $690 on your next payday. All we need is a recent pay stub, your bank statement, and ID. The whole process takes about 15 minutes, and the money's in your account within an hour. $90 for 2 weeks on $600. Maria's tired brain tried to calculate the annual percentage rate, but the numbers got fuzzy. It seemed high, but not impossibly high. And it was just for 2 weeks, just until she could figure out a better solution. "What if I can't pay it back in 2 weeks?" she asked. "Oh, we understand that sometimes things happen. We can extend the loan for another 2 weeks for the same fee, another $90. That gives you more time to get your finances organized. Most of our customers only need 1 or 2 extensions before they get everything straightened out." 1 or 2 extensions. $90 plus another $90 equals $180 in fees to borrow $600 for a month. Still expensive, but manageable if it bought her time to figure out a permanent solution. Is there any other option? Like a longer-term loan with smaller payments? Honey, if you want longer terms, you need to go to a bank. But banks take weeks to process applications. They want perfect credit, and they ask for all kinds of documentation. We're here for emergencies when you need money today, not next month. Maria stood there in the fluorescent light, feeling the weight of Diego's recovery. The hospital bill, the 30-day deadline, and her own exhaustion. Every option she'd explored had led to dead ends. Every door she'd knocked on had been politely closed. This door was not only open, but welcoming. "What do I need to bring?" she heard herself ask. 20 minutes later, Maria was back with her documents. Last 2 pay stubs showing gross pay of $350 per week. Bank statement showing a balance of $1.247, her savings plus her last paycheck and her driver's license. The application was surprisingly simple. Name, address, employer, bank account information. The woman behind the glass, whose name tag read Jennifer, explained each section with the patience of a kindergarten teacher. "This section is where we put how much you're borrowing, $600. This section is the fee, $90. This section is your repayment date, 1 Jenna. That's your next payday, the 3rd of November. And this is the total amount due, $690. What's this section about automatic withdrawal? Oh, that just makes it easier for everyone. On the 3rd of November, we automatically withdraw the $690 from your checking account. No need to remember to come in, no risk of being late, no additional fees. It's all automatic." Automatic. That sounded convenient and terrifying at the same time. What if there's not enough money in my account on the 3rd of November? Well, that's what we call insufficient funds, and your bank will charge you a fee for that, usually around $35. Plus, we'd have to charge you a returned payment fee of $25. But that's why we verify your income first, to make sure you can afford the payment. Maria looked at the numbers again. Gross pay of $350 per week meant take-home pay of about $275 after taxes and deductions. 2 weeks meant $550 take-home. The automatic withdrawal was $690. "Wait," she said, "my take-home pay for 2 weeks is only about $550, but you're taking out $690. How does that work?" Jennifer's smile faltered for just a moment, then brightened again. "Oh, honey, you make more than that. See? Your pay stub says $350 gross. But that's before taxes and deductions. My actual take-home is about $275 per week." "Well, yes, but most people have other income. Tips, side jobs, family help. And you've got 2 full weeks to figure it out. A lot can happen in 2 weeks. A lot could happen in 2 weeks. Maria could pick up extra shifts. Diego could get better, faster, and maybe find a part-time job. Sophia could contribute from her babysitting money. The hospital could approve charity care early. Her sister Rosa could change her mind about helping. A lot could happen in 2 weeks that didn't require Maria to stand in a payday loan office, making decisions based on hope instead of mathematics. But Diego needed his post-operative medication. The hospital needed their first payment. The electric company needed their monthly payment. The landlord needed the rent. Maria signed the papers. The money appeared in her checking account at 4:47 p.m., like magic. For the first time in a week, she felt like she could breathe. She drove to the pharmacy and paid for Diego's antibiotics without having to ask the pharmacist if there was a generic version. She stopped at the grocery store and bought actual groceries instead of the cheapest possible calories. She even splurged on a rotisserie chicken that would provide protein for 3 meals. That night, for the first time since the hospital visit, Maria slept through the night. She had $600 in cash, a plan to pay the hospital, and 2 weeks to figure out how to pay back $690. What could go wrong? Have you ever borrowed money that felt like salvation until the payment was due? Right? Trapped, if you remember that exact moment when relief turned into panic. The 3rd of November arrived like a deadline you've been dreading, but somehow still forgot to prepare for. Maria woke up at 4:47. a.m. as usual, but instead of her normal routine, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, doing mathematics that had kept her awake most of the night. Checking account balance, $247. Automatic withdrawal scheduled for today, $690. The deficit was $443, which meant her account would be overdrawn, which meant bank fees, which meant returned payment fees to the Payday loan company, which meant more debt on top of debt she already couldn't afford. But first, she had to get through her workday. At the diner, she moved through her routine on autopilot: coffee for table 3, order of pancakes for table 7, smile and cheerful conversation with regulars who had no idea their waitress was drowning in financial quicksand. During her break, she called her bank. "Yes, ma'am, I see the pending withdrawal for $690 and your current balance is $247. That transaction will be declined for insufficient funds and you'll be charged a $35 returned payment fee." "Can you explain that to me? If the transaction is declined, why do I get charged a fee?" "The fee is for the processing cost of handling a declined transaction. It's standard bank policy." Standard bank policy. Maria was learning that standard policy was code for "we charge fees because we can, and if you can't afford our services, we'll charge you extra fees for being poor." At 3 p.m., her phone buzzed with a text message. Payment of $690 could not be processed due to insufficient funds. Please call 1-800-FASTCASH immediately to avoid additional fees. Maria used her 15-minute break to call the number. Fast Cash Solutions. This is Jennifer speaking. How can I help you make your payment today? This is Maria Santos. My automatic payment was declined this morning. Oh yes, Miss Santos. I have your file right here. Okay. So your payment of $690 was declined, which means we need to add a $25 returned payment fee. Your new balance is $715. We can try the automatic withdrawal again tomorrow if you'd like to make a deposit. I don't have $715. I barely have $300. I understand, honey. And that's why we have options. We can extend your loan for another 2 weeks. That's just another $90 fee. So your total would be $600. Principal plus $90, original fee plus $25, return payment fee plus $90 extension fee. That's $805 total, but you don't have to pay it for another 2 weeks. The numbers swirled in Maria's head like dirty water going down a drain. $600 borrowed, $205 in various fees, $805 total owed. 2 more weeks to find money she didn't have. What if I can only pay part of it, like $400? Oh, I'm sorry, but we can't accept partial payments. It's all or nothing. Either you pay the full amount or you extend for the full amount. But don't worry, lots of our customers extend their loans. It's totally normal. Totally normal. Maria was learning that totally normal in Payday loan language meant this is how we make most of our money, not from people who pay back quickly, but from people who get trapped in extensions. Do I have any other choice? Well, you could take out an additional loan to help cover this one. You qualify for up to $300 more, which would give you $1,100 total to work with. That might be enough to pay off this loan and still have money left over for other expenses. Take out another loan to pay for the first loan. Even in her exhausted state, Maria recognized this as the financial equivalent of drinking salt water when you're dying of thirst. "I think I need to extend the loan," she said, feeling each word like a nail being hammered into her financial coffin. "Great choice. Let me process that for you right now. Your new due date is the 17th of November, and your new balance is $805. Maria hung up and sat in her car in the diner parking lot, watching normal people live normal lives while she tried to figure out how she'd gotten into a situation where owing $805 was better than owing $715. 2 weeks later, the 17th of November, Maria had managed to save $450 by working extra shifts and eating nothing but rice and beans for 2 weeks. Her account balance was $450. Her payment due was $805. The conversation with Jennifer was becoming depressingly familiar. We can extend again for another $90, which brings your total to $895. Or, since you've got $450, I can set up what we call a renewal plan. You pay the $205 in fees you owe right now, and we restart your loan with the original $600 balance. That's essentially like getting a fresh start. A fresh start that cost $205 and left her exactly where she started, but with $205 less in her bank account. Maria chose the renewal plan, telling herself it was progress, even though the mathematics said otherwise. The 1st of December. Maria owed $690 again, the original $600 plus $90 fee. She had $380 in her account. She extended for another $90, bringing her total debt to $780. The 15th of December, Maria owed $780. She had $500 saved. She paid the $180 in accumulated fees and renewed the original $600 loan. Again, the 29th of December, Maria owed $690. She had $200 in her account. She extended for $90, bringing the total to $780. The 12th of January, Maria had paid $450 in fees over 4 months and still owed the original $600 plus fees. This is how payday loans work. You don't borrow money, you rent it at rates that would make credit card companies blush. The average payday loan customer stays in debt for 5 months of the year, paying more in fees than they originally borrowed. Maria had become a statistic without realizing it. But the real cost wasn't just financial. It was the shame of hiding the truth from Diego and Sofia, who noticed that their mother had started working extra shifts, but they never seemed to have more money. It was the anxiety that woke her up every night at 3 a.m., calculating and recalculating numbers that never added up to success. It was the slow realization that she'd traded a one-time emergency for a permanent financial emergency. It was the conversation with Diego when he offered to quit school and get a full-time job to help with money. "Mom, I know things are tight. Maybe I should drop out and work." "Absolutely not. Your education is not negotiable. But if it would help." "Diego, listen to me. The reason I work so hard is so you and your sister can have better choices than I had. School stays. End of discussion." But late at night, after both kids were asleep, Maria would sit at the kitchen table with a calculator and a yellow legal pad, trying to find a way out of a trap that seemed designed to never let her go. She'd researched alternatives online during her breaks at work. Credit counseling services wanted fees she couldn't afford. Debt consolidation loans required credit she didn't have. Bankruptcy seemed extreme and expensive and shameful. The Payday loan store on 5th Street had become part of her routine, as regular as buying groceries or getting gas. Every 2 weeks, she'd drive there after work, extend her loan, pay her fees, and tell herself this would be the last time. But last time kept getting postponed by reality. Hospital bills, car repairs, Sophia's need for new school clothes, Diego's post-surgery follow-up appointments that cost $75 each. Each crisis justified another extension, another $90 fee, Another 2 weeks of hoping for a miracle that would break the cycle. 6 months after borrowing $600 for Diego's surgery, Maria had paid $810 in fees and still owed the original $600. The hospital bill remained unpaid, growing with late fees and interest. The payday loan cycle continued, consuming money that might have gone toward actually solving problems instead of just postponing them. Maria was learning the hardest lesson of financial literacy. Sometimes the thing that saves you in the short term is the thing that destroys you in the long term. But she was also learning something else. The people around her had noticed her struggle, even when she tried to hide it. The kitchen conversation happened on a Tuesday evening in March, 8 months after Diego's surgery. Maria was sitting at the table with her laptop, trying to balance her checkbook while simultaneously researching charity care programs that might help with the hospital bill that had grown to $9.200 with late fees and collection costs. Sophia, her 6-year-old daughter, came home from her part-time job at the ice cream shop and found her mother surrounded by papers, calculator, and the kind of quiet desperation that teenagers recognize, even when adults try to hide it. "Mom, we need to talk." Maria looked up from her laptop screen, where a debt consolidation website was promising solutions that seemed too good to be true. "What's wrong, baby?" "That's what I want to ask you. What's wrong with our money?" The question hit Maria like cold water. "What do you mean?" Sophia sat down across from her mother, her young face serious in a way that made Maria's chest tight. "Mom, you're working more hours than ever, but we never have money for anything. You won't let me buy lunch at school anymore. We haven't gone to a movie in months. And every Friday, you get this look on your face like something terrible is about to happen." Maria stared at her daughter, seeing herself at 16, worried about money, watching her own mother struggle, learning too young that financial stress was a constant companion in their family. "We're fine, Sophia. Just going through a rough patch." "Mom, I'm not stupid. I know Diego's surgery cost a lot of money. I know you've been stressed about it. But what I don't understand is why it seems like we have less money now than we did right after the surgery." That was the question Maria had been asking herself for months. How could she be working more hours, spending less money on everything, and still feel like she was falling further behind every week? The answer was sitting in her purse, a payday loan receipt showing her next payment due date and the $90 fee that would disappear from her checking account in 3 days, leaving her short for rent again, which would mean another extension, another fee, another 2 weeks of treading water in financial quicksand. "Sophia, baby, sometimes adults have to make difficult financial decisions to handle emergencies. Everything's going to work out." "Mom, can I see your budget?" "My what?" "Your budget. I've been learning about personal finance in my economics class, and Mr. Peterson says the first step to fixing money problems is understanding exactly where your money goes every month." Maria had never created a formal budget, mainly because she'd never had enough money to require complex allocation decisions. Money came in, money went to necessities, whatever was left went to whatever crisis demanded immediate attention. But sitting there looking at Sophia's earnest face, Maria realized her daughter was right. She had no clear picture of where her money was going, which made it impossible to figure out where it should go instead. They spent the next hour laying out Maria's finances on paper. Income: $1,400, take-home pay per month. Fixed expenses: rent, $650 chime. Electric, $85. Phone, $95. Car insurance, $110. Total fixed, $940. Variable expenses: groceries, $400. Gas, $120. Miscellaneous, $150. Total variable, $670. Total expenses, $1,610. Income, $1,400. Monthly deficit, $210. Mom, Sophia said quietly, according to this, we're spending $210 more than you make every month. How is that possible? That was before the payday loan payments, which averaged $180 per month between fees and principal reductions. The real deficit was $390 per month, covered by a combination of overdraft fees, skipped meals, and the occasional $20 bill found in coat pockets. It's more complicated than that, baby. Where's the hospital bill in this budget? We haven't been able to make payments on that yet. What about savings? Maria looked at her daughter and felt the weight of failure settle on her shoulders like a heavy coat. There's no money for savings right now. Sophia was quiet for a long moment, studying the numbers with the intensity of someone solving a puzzle. Mom, what if I got more hours at work? I could contribute to groceries. Absolutely not. Your job is to be a student. But if I could help? Sophia, listen to me. The reason I work so hard is so you can focus on school and have better opportunities than I had. Your education is not negotiable. Then, what's the solution? That was the question that kept Maria awake every night. What was the solution to a deficit that grew larger every month despite her best efforts to control expenses? She'd tried everything she could think of: shopping at discount stores, using coupons religiously, walking to work when possible, eating rice and beans more often than she cared to admit. But no amount of frugality could close a $390 monthly gap between income and necessary expenses. The payday loan cycle had started as a temporary bridge to handle Diego's surgery. But temporary had become permanent because the underlying problem, not enough income to cover basic living expenses, had never been solved. I'm working on it, Maria said, which was both true and completely inadequate. That night, after Sophia went to bed, Maria sat in her car in the parking lot of the payday loan store, staring at the neon sign and trying to summon the courage to walk away. She'd paid over $1,400 in fees over 10 months. The original $600 loan had cost her more than twice the amount she'd borrowed, and she still owed the principal balance. Meanwhile, the hospital bill had gone to collections. Her credit score, which had never been great, was now officially terrible. Collection agencies called at all hours, using different numbers so she couldn't block them all. But the worst part was the realization that her daughter was learning about money by watching her mother make increasingly desperate financial decisions. Sophia was 16, the same age Maria had been when she'd promised herself she'd never struggle with money the way her own mother had struggled. Yet, here she was, 27 years later, sitting in a payday loan parking lot, teaching her daughter that sometimes adults make choices that trap them in cycles they can't escape. The next morning, Sophia approached her mother with a proposal that broke Maria's heart and opened her eyes at the same time. Mom, I've been thinking about our budget. What if we moved to a smaller apartment? I looked online, and there are places for $450 a month instead of $650. That would save us $200 per month. Moving to a smaller place would mean the kids sharing a room again, less privacy, probably a worse neighborhood. But it would also mean $200 more per month to work with, which was almost enough to cover the payday loan fees that were eating her alive. And what if I transferred to the community college dual enrollment program? I could finish high school and get college credits at the same time. It's free, and I could keep working more hours since the schedule is more flexible. Sophia had researched solutions, while Maria had been trapped in a cycle of extending loans and paying fees. Her 6-year-old daughter had identified concrete steps that could improve their situation, while Maria had been focused on managing the crisis rather than solving the underlying problem. Baby, You don't need to sacrifice your plans because of my mistakes. Mom, we're a family. When one person struggles, we all struggle. When we find solutions, we all benefit." That conversation planted a seed in Maria's mind. Maybe the solution wasn't finding more creative ways to manage her payday loan cycle. Maybe the solution was finding the courage to break the cycle entirely. But breaking the cycle would mean facing consequences that terrified her more than the cycle itself. When you're drowning in fees and extensions, what's harder to find? The money to pay or the courage to stop paying? Share your story. I knew. Sometimes the bravest financial decision is the one that scares you most. The breaking point came on a Thursday in April, 14 months after Diego's surgery. Maria was sitting at the kitchen table at 2 a.m., surrounded by payday loan statements, collection notices from the hospital, and a stack of returned check fees from her bank. In front of her was a legal pad with 2 columns, amount borrowed and amount paid. Amount originally borrowed, $600. Total fees paid in 14 months, $1,960. Current balance still owed, $600. She had paid more than 3 times the original amount and still owed every penny of the principal. The mathematics were so absurd they looked like a mistake, but she'd checked her bank statements twice. $1,960 in fees for the privilege of owing $600. Meanwhile, the hospital bill had grown to $10,400 with collection costs and penalties. Her credit score had dropped below 500. Collection agencies called so frequently she'd stopped answering her phone entirely. But the moment that changed everything wasn't about the money. It was about the shame. Diego, now 18 and preparing for graduation, had been accepted to the local community college with a partial scholarship. All he needed was $200 for registration fees and books. $200. Less than Maria paid in payday loan fees every month. "Mom, I know money's tight, but I filled out all the financial aid forms, and this is all I need to start college in the fall." Maria looked at her son, too said, healthy, smart, motivated, everything she'd worked to help him become, and felt the weight of her financial choices crushing her chest. She had $47 in her checking account. Her next paycheck was 3 days away, but $180 of it was already committed to payday loan fees. "Can you give me a couple weeks to figure it out?" she asked, knowing that in 2 weeks she'd still have the same problem. Every dollar she earned was already spoken for by a cycle that never ended. That night, Maria did something she hadn't done in months. She researched what would happen if she simply stopped paying the payday loan. What she learned surprised her. Payday loans are civil debt, not criminal. Despite the threatening language in collection letters, no one goes to jail for owing payday loan companies money. Yes, they could sue her, but lawsuits cost money, and most payday lenders don't sue for amounts under $2,000 because the legal costs exceed the potential recovery. Yes, they could damage her credit further, but her credit was already destroyed. Adding more negative marks to a score below 500 was like adding more water to a swimming pool that's already full. Yes, they could call her and send threatening letters, but she could document those contacts and demand verification of the debt, which many payday lenders couldn't provide because they sold loans between companies so frequently. More importantly, Maria realized that her fear of consequences had trapped her in a situation where the consequences were guaranteed and getting worse every month. She was so afraid of damaging her credit that she'd destroyed her entire financial life to protect a credit score that was already damaged. At 3:47 a.m., Maria made a decision that felt like jumping off a cliff. She was going to stop paying the payday loan and use that money to actually solve problems instead of perpetually postponing them. The first step was opening a new checking account at a different bank, one the Payday loan company couldn't access. She transferred her payroll deposit to the new account and left just enough money in the old account to avoid closure fees. The second step was calling the hospital billing department with a proposal that felt both terrifying and liberating. "I want to restart negotiations on my son's medical bill. I can afford $200 per month if you'll accept it." The billing representative, probably accustomed to patients who couldn't pay anything at all, was surprisingly cooperative. "Let me transfer you to our financial hardship department." 20 minutes later, Maria had an agreement. $200 per month for 48 months, no interest, no collection activity, as long as she made consistent payments. The total payment would be $9,600, less than the current balance with collection fees removed. The third step was taking the money she would have spent on payday loan fees and starting an emergency fund. $180 per month into a savings account at a third bank, one that would require a conscious decision to access instead of automatic withdrawals. The fourth step was having an honest conversation with Diego and Sofia about their financial situation. "I need to tell you both something about why money's been so tight. After Diego's surgery, I made some financial choices that seemed necessary at the time, but turned into a trap that's been making our situation worse instead of better." She explained the payday loan cycle without getting into specific numbers, focusing on the lesson instead of the shame. "I borrowed money for an emergency, but the fees were so high that I could never pay it back. Instead of solving the emergency, I created a permanent problem." She had paid more than 3 times the original amount and still owed every penny of the principal. The mathematics were so absurd, they looked like a mistake, but she'd checked her bank statements twice. $1,960 in fees for the privilege of owing $600. Meanwhile, the hospital bill had grown to $10,400 with collection costs and penalties. Her credit score had dropped below 500. Collection agencies called so frequently she'd stopped answering her phone entirely. But the moment that changed everything wasn't about the money. It was about the shame. Diego, now 18 and preparing for graduation, had been accepted to the local community college with a partial scholarship. All he needed was $200 for registration fees and books. $200, less than Maria paid in payday loan fees every month. "Mom, I know money's tight, but I filled out all the financial aid forms, and this is all I need to start college in the fall." Maria looked at her son. Healthy, smart, motivated, everything she'd worked to help him become, and felt the weight of her financial choices crushing her chest. She had $47 in her checking account. Her next paycheck was 3 days away, but $180 of it was already committed to payday loan fees. "Can you give me a couple weeks to figure it out?" she asked, knowing that in 2 weeks she'd still have the same problem. Every dollar she earned was already spoken for by a cycle that never ended. That night, Maria did something she hadn't done in months. She researched what would happen if she simply stopped paying the payday loan. What she learned surprised her. Payday loans are civil debt, not criminal. Despite the threatening language in collection letters, no one goes to jail for owing payday loan companies money. Yes, they could sue her, but lawsuits cost money, and most payday lenders don't sue for amounts under $2,000 because the legal costs exceed the potential recovery. Yes, they could damage her credit further, but her credit was already destroyed. Adding more negative marks to a score below 500 was like adding more water to a swimming pool that's already full. Yes, they could call her and send threatening letters, but she could document those contacts and demand verification of the debt, which many payday lenders couldn't provide because they sold loans between companies so frequently. More importantly, Maria realized that her fear of consequences had trapped her in a situation where the consequences were guaranteed and getting worse every month. She was so afraid of damaging her credit that she destroyed her entire financial life to protect a credit score that was already damaged. At 3:47 a.m., Maria made a decision that felt like jumping off a cliff. She was going to stop paying the payday loan and use that money to actually solve problems instead of perpetually postponing them. The first step was opening a new checking account at a different bank, one the payday loan company couldn't access. She transferred her payroll deposit to the new account and left just enough money in the old account to avoid closure fees. The second step was calling the hospital billing department with a proposal that felt both terrifying and liberating. "I want to restart negotiations on my son's medical bill. I can afford $200 per month if you'll accept it." The billing representative, probably accustomed to patients who couldn't pay anything at all, was surprisingly cooperative. "Let me transfer you to our financial hardship department." 20 minutes later, Maria had an agreement. $200 per month for 48 months, no interest, no collection activity, as long as she made consistent payments. The total payment would be $9,600, less than the current balance with collection fees removed. The third step was taking the money she would have spent on payday loan fees and starting an emergency fund. $180 per month into a savings account at a third bank, one that would require a conscious decision to access instead of automatic withdrawals. The fourth step was having an honest conversation with Diego and Sofia about their financial situation. "I need to tell you both something about why money's been so tight. After Diego's surgery, I made some financial choices that seemed necessary at the time, but turned into a trap that's been making our situation worse instead of better." She explained the payday loan cycle without getting into specific numbers, focusing on the lesson instead of the shame. "I borrowed money for an emergency, but the fees were so high that I could never pay it back. Instead of solving the emergency, I created a permanent problem. $225 fee on $1,500 for 2 weeks. Maria's calculator brain, trained by expensive experience, immediately computed the annual percentage rate, over 400%. Carmen was about to walk into the same trap that had cost Maria nearly $2,000 in fees to borrow $600. "Carmen, can you meet me after work? I want to show you some numbers before you make that decision." They met at a coffee shop down the street from the diner, and Maria spread papers across the table like she was teaching a graduate course in financial survival. "Carmen, look at this. That $225 fee for 2 weeks equals an annual rate of over 400%. If you can't pay back $1,725 in 2 weeks, and most people can't, you'll extend the loan for another $225, then another $225 2 weeks later. I paid almost $2,000 in fees on a $600 loan before I figured out how to stop." Carmen stared at the numbers with the same shock Maria had felt when she'd first calculated the true cost of her payday loan cycle. "But what choice do I have? My daughter's in pain and surgery can't wait. Let's try everything else first. Have you called the oral surgeon about payment plans? They said they need payment up front. Have you talked to the office manager or just the receptionist? Sometimes there are options that front desk staff don't know about." They spent the next hour on Maria's phone, calling the oral surgeon's office, Carmen's bank, and the local credit union. The oral surgeon's office manager reached after hours, agreed to accept $400 down and $200 per month payments. Carmen's credit union offered a signature loan at 12% instead of 400%. "I had no idea these options existed," Carmen said. "I didn't either until I was forced to learn the hard way." The payday loan industry depends on people not knowing about alternatives. But Maria's real gift to Carmen wasn't just helping her avoid payday loans. It was sharing the budgeting system that had helped Maria rebuild her financial life. Carmen, the reason people get trapped in payday loans isn't because they're bad with money. It's because they're trying to solve a math problem, not enough income to cover necessary expenses, with a loan that makes the math problem worse. They created Carmen's first budget using the envelope system Maria had refined over 2 years of trial and error. Fixed expenses, variable expenses, emergency fund, and debt payments as separate, prioritized categories. More importantly, they identified the underlying issue that made Carmen vulnerable to payday loan marketing. She had no emergency fund because she'd never been taught how to create one on a tight budget. Start with $25 per month, Maria suggested. It seems like nothing, but in a year you'll have $300, which handles most small emergencies without borrowing. In 2 years, you'll have $600, C10, enough to handle what happened to me without getting trapped. 6 months later, Carmen had paid off her daughter's dental surgery using the payment plan, built a $150 emergency fund, and avoided the payday loan trap that would have cost her thousands in fees. But more importantly, Carmen had become an informal financial counselor for other co-workers facing money emergencies. She kept Maria's phone number handy and had started a tradition of calling her whenever someone mentioned payday loans. "It's like a virus," Carmen told Maria. "Once you show people the real math, they can't unsee it. And once they see it, they want to show other people." 2 years after her last payday loan payment, Maria's emergency fund had grown to $2,400 LF, 4 times what she'd originally borrowed, and enough to handle most financial emergencies without debt. The hospital bill was down to $4,200 and would be paid off in another 21 months. Both kids were thriving in college, partly funded by scholarships they'd earned and part-time jobs they'd learned to balance with academics. But the real transformation was in Maria's relationship with financial stress. Instead of anxiety that woke her at 3 a.m., she had systems that helped her sleep peacefully. Instead of desperation that made payday loans seem reasonable, she had knowledge that made her immune to predatory lending marketing. Instead of shame about her financial mistakes, she had stories that helped other people avoid similar traps. On a quiet Sunday morning in May, exactly 3 years after Diego's appendectomy, Maria received a text message that brought tears to her eyes. It was from Diego. "Mom, I got the internship at the accounting firm. Paid position, $15 divided by hour, flexible around classes. First paycheck goes into my emergency fund, like you taught me. Thank you for showing me that money problems are just math problems with solutions." Maria smiled and filed the text message in a folder on her phone labeled "Worth It." The folder contained photos of both kids at college graduation ceremonies, bank statements showing steady emergency fund growth, and messages from co-workers who had avoided financial traps because Maria had shared her hard-won wisdom. The payday loan industry had taught Maria that desperate people make expensive decisions, but breaking free from that industry had taught her something more valuable. Informed people make empowering decisions. Financial peace isn't about having enough money to never face emergencies. It's about having enough knowledge to handle emergencies without creating permanent problems. It's about understanding that the most expensive money is often the money that seems easiest to get. It's about knowing that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone in financial crisis is not to give them money, but to give them better options. And it's about learning that your worst financial mistake can become your most valuable lesson, if you're brave enough to share it with others who need to hear they're not alone. Your turn. Have you ever helped someone see the true cost of what seemed like easy money? Or has someone done that for you? If this story reminded you that there's always an alternative to predatory lending, comment alternatives below to help others know they have choices, even when desperation makes those choices hard to see. And share this with someone who might need to hear that financial mistakes are not permanent failures. They're expensive educations that can lead to wisdom worth sharing. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say to someone drowning in fees and interest is, "I've been there. Let me show you the way out." This content is for educational purposes only and does not constitute financial advice. Always consult qualified financial professionals for your specific situation.